For years, she could not walk, until the Duke offered his hand and she stood before the entire court. The silence was absolute. Lady Arabella Thornwood sat frozen in her wheeled chair at the entrance to the throne room, every eye in the court fixed upon her with a mixture of pity and revulsion. She'd known this summons would come eventually. The new king required all noble families to present themselves for his inspection. But knowing hadn't made it easier. The marble floor stretched before her like an ocean, impossibly vast, impossibly distant from the raised dais where His Majesty waited. Her legs, useless beneath her emerald skirts, trembled with phantom sensation. And then, cutting through the whispers like a sword through silk, came a voice that made the entire assembly fall silent. "Your Majesty, if I may." The Duke of Ashbourne stepped from the shadows beside the throne, his storm-gray eyes finding hers across the impossible distance. "I believe Lady Thornwood requires an escort." He crossed the throne room with the easy grace of a predator, and when he reached her chair, he did something no one had done in the 5 years since the accident. He offered her his hand. Not to push her chair, not to carry her like a child, but to help her stand. "Trust me," he whispered, his voice for her alone. And God help her, she did. Wait, before the next confession unfolds. If this story has already stirred your heart, tell us where you're watching from. To make sure you don't miss the next betrayal, kiss, or redemption, subscribe and join our circle. The next heartbeat might change everything. Now, back to the scene. Arabella stared at the Duke's extended hand as if it were a viper. "Your Grace," she whispered, acutely aware of 300 courtiers watching this exchange, "I cannot stand. I have not stood in 5 years. This is—" "Trust me," he repeated, and there was something in his eyes, a certainty, a knowledge that made her breath catch. Her mind screamed that this was madness, that she would fall, that she would humiliate herself before the entire court, before the king himself, that this was some cruel joke, another in a long line of humiliations she'd endured since becoming the crippled daughter of a disgraced house. But her hand, acting of its own accord, reached out and clasped his. His fingers closed around hers with surprising warmth, and then, with a gentleness that belied his powerful frame, he drew her upward. Arabella felt her weight shift from the chair, felt her feet, her useless, dead feet, touch the cold marble floor, and then, impossibly, miraculously, she felt them hold. Not strongly, not steadily, but they held. A gasp rippled through the throne room. "That's it," the Duke murmured, his other hand moving to her waist to steady her. "Just like that. Feel the ground beneath you. Remember what it was to stand." Tears streamed down Arabella's face. Her legs shook violently, threatening to give way at any moment. But the Duke held her, his strength lending her stability, and together, they stood. "Impossible," someone whispered. "A miracle," breathed another. King Edward himself rose from his throne, his young face alight with wonder. "Lady Thornwood, can you truly stand?" Arabella's voice failed her. She looked up at the Duke, at the face that was both stranger and savior, and saw him smile with such warmth that her heart stuttered. "She can," the Duke said firmly, "and with time and proper care, she will walk again. I stake my reputation upon it." The throne room erupted in whispers. Arabella felt the world tilt and spin around her, felt her legs beginning to give way, and the Duke immediately swept her back into her chair with the same gentle strength. But something had changed. Something fundamental had shifted in the air. She had stood. After 5 years of darkness and despair, after countless physicians declaring her case hopeless, after her own family had given up on her, she had stood. And the man who had made it possible was staring at her with eyes that held secrets she desperately needed to understand. It had begun with a fall. 5 years ago, Arabella Thornwood had been the toast of London society, beautiful, accomplished, betrothed to the Earl of Wessex. Life had been a glittering procession of balls and garden parties, of admiring suitors and envious friends. And then, one terrible afternoon during a country house party, she'd fallen from a horse during a hunt. Not a dramatic fall, not a spectacular tumble that would have made for good storytelling. Just a simple loss of balance, a weak awkward angle, the sickening crack of bone meeting earth. She'd woken 3 days later, unable to feel anything below her waist. The physicians had been grave. Spinal injury, they'd said. Nothing to be done. Should never walk again, never dance, never be a proper wife. The Earl of Wessex had broken their engagement with barely concealed relief. Her family had retreated to their country estate in shame. A crippled daughter was a liability, not an asset. For 5 years, Arabella had existed in a twilight world of pain and limitation. Her younger sister, Cecilia, had made her debut and married well. Her parents rarely spoke to her, except to express disappointment at the match she'd failed to make. The grandchildren should never provide. Should learn to navigate her wheeled chair with grace. Should learn to endure the pitying glances and awkward silences. Should learn to bury her dreams so deep that most days she could pretend they'd never existed. And then King Edward, newly crowned at 23, had issued his proclamation. All noble families must present themselves at court, no exceptions. Her father had tried to leave her behind. But the summons had been explicit. All members of noble houses, every single one. So here she was, wheeled into the throne room by a footman who'd looked at her with undisguised disgust, subjected to the stares of hundreds, facing a humiliation that would be whispered about for years. Until the Duke of Ashbourne had changed everything. Now, as the court slowly returned to its business, and Arabella was wheeled to a corner where she could observe without being the center of attention, she found her eyes tracking the Duke's movements across the room. He was magnificent, tall, with broad shoulders and the bearing of a man accustomed to command. His dark hair was touched with silver at the temples, suggesting he was older than her 26 years, perhaps 35 or 40. He moved with a controlled power that reminded her of a caged wolf. And he'd looked at her not with pity, but with recognition, as if he saw not her limitations, but her potential. Quite a spectacle, wasn't it? Arabella turned to find another young woman beside her, also in a wheelchair, also bearing the marks of obvious disability. She had good brown eyes and a wry smile. "I'm Lady Margaret Hastings," the woman said, "and I know exactly what you're thinking. Did it really happen, or did you imagine it?" "I felt it," Arabella whispered. "I felt my feet on the floor. I felt my legs supporting my weight. For a moment, just a moment, I stood." Margaret nodded slowly. "The Duke of Ashbourne has that effect. There are rumors about him, you know. Very interesting rumors." "What kind of rumors?" "The kind that gets you burned as a witch if you're not careful." Margaret leaned closer, lowering her voice. "They say he studied medicine in Vienna. Not the polite, theoretical medicine taught at Cambridge, but real medicine, anatomy, surgery, things no gentleman should know." Arabella's heart began to race. "And you think he can truly help me? That it wasn't just luck? Or my imagination? I think the Duke of Ashbourne is many things. Arrogant, mysterious, Possibly dangerous, but I don't think he's a liar. Margaret glanced across the room to where the Duke stood deep in conversation with the king. He said you would walk again. That's either the greatest cruelty imaginable, or it's the truth. I suppose you'll have to decide which. Before Arabella could respond, a footman appeared bearing a sealed letter on a silver tray. Lady Arabella Thornwood? Yes. From His Grace, the Duke of Ashbourne. He presented the tray with a bow and departed. Arabella's hands trembled as she broke the seal. The handwriting was strong and precise. Lady Thornwood. I do not make promises I cannot keep. You stood today, briefly, imperfectly, but you stood. That proves your injury is not absolute. There is hope. If you desire to pursue this hope, to fight for your recovery rather than accept your limitations, I can help. I have knowledge that conventional physicians lack, techniques learned in places where medicine is art rather than theory. The path will be difficult, painful. There will be days when you curse me for pushing you so hard. But if you are willing to endure, I believe you can walk again. The choice is yours. Should you wish to proceed, send word to my residence in Grosvenor Square, Ashbourne. P.S. You are stronger than you know. I saw it in your eyes when you reached for my hand. That strength is the foundation upon which we will build everything else. Arabella read the letter 3 times, her mind whirling. This was impossible. Physicians had told her repeatedly that her condition was permanent, that hope was foolish. But she had felt it. The floor beneath her feet, the straightness of her spine, the possibility. What does it say? Margaret asked gently. He offers hope, and I don't know if I'm brave enough to accept it. Then let me tell you something, Lady Thornwood. Margaret's expression grew serious. I have been in this chair for 7 years. I have tried everything, every physician, every treatment, every prayer. Nothing has worked. If someone offered me what the Duke is offering you, I would crawl over broken glass to accept it. What if he's wrong? What if I fail? What if you don't? Margaret reached out and squeezed her hand. You felt yourself stand today. That's more than most of us will ever know. Don't throw away that miracle because you're afraid of disappointment. That night, Arabella lay awake in the small room she'd been given at the palace, staring at the ceiling and replaying the moment over and over. The Duke's hand in hers, the impossible sensation of standing, the look in his eyes that had made her feel, for the first time in 5 years, like something more than broken. She thought about her life, the endless days of sitting, of being moved from chair to chair like furniture, the way her parents avoided looking at her, the pitying glances from former friends, the slow death of all her dreams. And she thought about the possibility, remote, perhaps impossible, but there, of walking again, of being whole. Just before dawn, she made her decision. She summoned a maid and dictated a letter. Your Grace, I accept. When do we begin? Lady Arabella Thornwood. The response came within hours. Tomorrow, 10 o'clock, my residence. Wear comfortable clothing that allows freedom of movement. And, Lady Thornwood, prepare yourself. The easy part is over. A. The Duke of Ashbourne's residence was a massive Georgian mansion that spoke of old money and older secrets. Arabella was carried up the steps by 2 footmen, while a third brought her chair, a humiliation she'd grown used to but still hated with every fiber of her being. A butler led her through marble halls hung with portraits of stern-faced ancestors until they reached a set of double doors. He knocked once, then pushed them open. Lady Arabella Thornwood, Your Grace. The room beyond was unlike any drawing room Arabella had ever seen. One wall was lined with books, medical texts, anatomical drawings, journals in multiple languages. Another held what looked like an artist's rendering of the human body, with muscles and bones labeled in precise detail. In the center of the room was a long padded table, and beside it an array of devices whose purpose Arabella couldn't begin to guess. The Duke stood at the window, his back to her. He wore no coat, just shirt sleeves and a vest, his dark hair slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his hands through it. "Your Grace," Arabella said, her voice carefully controlled. "Your letter said to come prepared. I confess I'm not certain what I'm preparing for." He turned, and the intensity in his gray eyes took her breath away. "For the most difficult thing you've ever done. For pain, frustration, and moments when you'll hate both me and yourself." That's a rather grim sales pitch. A smile flickered across his face, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "I don't believe in false promises or sugar-coated truths. You deserve to know exactly what you're facing." "And what am I facing?" He crossed to where she sat and knelt down so their eyes were level. This close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the slight scar above his left eyebrow, the intelligence that burned in his gaze like a banked fire. "You stood yesterday. Do you know what that means? That there's hope? That your spinal cord is not completely severed. If it were, you would feel nothing, could do nothing. But you felt your feet. You supported your weight, however briefly. That suggests the damage is incomplete. Severe, yes, but not absolute." Hope flared in Arabella's chest, so bright it almost hurt. "Then why did every physician tell me I'd never walk again?" "Because they know only what they've been taught, and what they've been taught is limited by centuries of medical ignorance." His voice carried a bitter edge. In Vienna, in Paris, in universities across the continent, physicians are learning to look deeper, to understand that the human body is not a mystery to be accepted, but a puzzle to be solved. "And you studied there?" "I did, against my family's wishes, against every social convention. I spent 5 years abroad learning from the greatest medical minds of our age. And when I returned, I found myself ostracized by polite society for having engaged in ungentlemanly pursuits." The irony in his voice was palpable. Apparently, a duke should be content to drink, gamble, and produce heirs, not cut open cadavers to understand how the body works. "Why did you do it?" Arabella asked quietly. "Why risk everything to study medicine?" His expression shuddered for a moment, and she glimpsed something dark and painful beneath the surface. "Because I lost someone I loved to medical ignorance. And I swore that if I ever had the power to prevent such loss again, I would." The raw honesty in his words stunned her. This was not the polished charm of a courtier, but the naked truth of a man who'd been wounded and had chosen to turn his pain into purpose. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be. It made me who I am, just as your accident made you who you are." He stood, offering his hand once more. "Now, shall we see what you're capable of?" Arabella placed her hand in his, and he drew her upward with the same gentle strength as before. This time, she was prepared for the sensation. The shift of weight, the trembling weakness in her legs, the way the world seemed to tilt and spin. "Breathe," he instructed. "Feel your feet on the floor. Don't think about standing. Just be standing." She tried, but her legs were shaking so hard she thought they might shatter. "I can't." "You are. You're doing it right now." His hands moved to her waist, steadying but not supporting her entirely. "The muscles are still there, Arabella. They've weakened from disuse, but they exist. Your body remembers how to do this. We just need to remind it." Arabella. He'd used her given name, and the intimacy of it sent warmth through her chest. "How long?" she gasped. "How long can I stand?" "As long as you can endure." When you can no longer hold yourself up, we'll stop, but not before. It was agony. Her legs burned with effort, her back screamed in protest, sweat beaded on her forehead. She wanted to give up, to sink back into the safety of her chair. But the Duke's presence, his steady confidence, kept her upright. He believed she could do this, and slowly, painfully, she began to believe it too. 30 seconds, he said quietly. You've been standing for 30 seconds. It feels like hours. That's because you're doing real work. Your muscles are engaging, firing, trying to remember their purpose. He shifted slightly, adjusting his grip on her waist. Can you feel them? The muscles in your thighs, your calves, your core? She could. Not clearly, not strongly, but she could feel them. It was like hearing a voice through water, distant, distorted, but there. Another 10 seconds, he murmured. You're doing beautifully. At 45 seconds, her legs gave out. The Duke caught her smoothly, lowering her back into her chair with practiced ease. Arabella collapsed against the cushions, gasping for breath, her entire body trembling. I'm sorry, I couldn't. You stood for 45 seconds. Yesterday, you stood for perhaps 15. That's triple the progress in a single day. He handed her a glass of water, which she drank gratefully. Do you understand what this means? That I'm weak? That you're strong. Most people couldn't do what you just did. Most people would have given up at 10 seconds or 20. But you pushed through the pain, through the fear, and you stood. He pulled up a chair and sat facing her, his expression serious. This is how we'll proceed. Every day, we'll push a little further, stand a little longer, and slowly, gradually, we'll build strength back into those muscles. And then what? You'll be able to stand for minutes instead of seconds? That hardly seems worth. And then, he interrupted, you'll take a step. Just one at first, then 2, then 10, then 100. And one day, Lady Arabella Thornwood, you'll walk into that throne room on your own feet and show every person who pitied you exactly how strong you really are. The vision he painted stole her breath. To walk again, to dance, to be free of this chair, this limitation, this prison. How long? She whispered. How long will it take? Months, perhaps a year or more. The body heals slowly, and the path is never straight. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. But I promise you this, if you're willing to work, willing to endure, willing to trust me, I will help you walk again. Tears spilled down Arabella's cheeks. She didn't try to stop them. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. You owe me nothing. Because I can. Because I have knowledge that can change your life, and to withhold it would be unconscionable. His hand reached out and gently wiped away one of her tears with his thumb. And because when I looked at you in that throne room, I saw someone fighting, someone refusing to surrender despite every reason to give up. That kind of strength deserves to be honored, not pitied. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding, a connection that went beyond words. Arabella felt it settle in her chest like a warm coal, glowing gently. What happens now? She asked. Now you rest. Tomorrow we do it again, and the day after, and the day after that, until standing becomes easy, until you're ready for the next step. And you'll be here? Every day? Every day, he promised. This is my work now. You are my work now. I won't let you fail. The conviction in his voice made her believe him, made her believe in the impossible. Then I'll see you tomorrow, Your Grace. Julian, he corrected. If we're to work together so intimately, formality seems absurd. Call me Julian. Julian, she tested the name. And you should call me Arabella. He smiled, and it transformed his face from handsome to beautiful. Until tomorrow, Arabella. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Arabella's life. Every morning at 10 o'clock, she arrived at Julian's residence. Every morning, he helped her stand, pushed her to hold the position longer, to distribute her weight more evenly, to feel the individual muscles engaging. Some days were triumphs. She stood for a minute, then 2, then 5. She began to feel the ground beneath her feet more clearly, to sense the way her body balanced and adjusted. Other days were disasters. Her legs refused to cooperate, or pain lanced through her spine so sharply she nearly fainted. On those days, Julian was patient and kind, adjusting their approach, trying new techniques. He taught her exercises to strengthen her core, showed her how to massage the weakened muscles in her legs, explained the anatomy of the spine with the help of his detailed drawings. And slowly, gradually, they became friends. She learned that he'd lost his younger sister to a fever when he was 23, that he'd watched helplessly as physicians bled her and dosed her with useless tinctures while she died in agony. He learned about her fall, about the physicians who'd declared her case hopeless, about the Earl who'd abandoned her without a backward glance, about her family's shame and her own slow descent into despair. They talked about books, about politics, about the new king's reforms. Julian had opinions on everything, delivered with a sharp wit that made her laugh. Arabella discovered that her own mind, so long confined to the narrow world of her limitations, was sharper than she'd remembered. "You should write," Julian said one day as they discussed a particularly bad piece of poetry that had been published in the Times. "Your analysis is better than half the critics in London." "Women don't write criticism." "Women don't study medicine either, supposedly, and yet here I am." He grinned. "Besides, you could write under a pseudonym. No one would know." The idea took root. That evening, Arabella began writing her first essay, a scathing review of romantic poetry that prized sentimentality over substance. She signed it A. Thornwood and submitted it to a small literary journal. To her shock, they published it and then asked for more. Writing became her second occupation, alongside the grueling physical work of learning to walk. It gave her a voice, a way to engage with the world beyond her limitations. And all the while, her feelings for Julian deepened. She told herself it was gratitude. He was helping her, changing her life. Of course she felt warmly toward him. But gratitude didn't explain the way her heart raced when he entered the room. Didn't explain the way she found herself thinking about him at odd hours. Didn't explain the dreams she had. Dreams of dancing with him, of being held in his arms, of being whole and desired and loved. She was falling in love with him, and it terrified her. Because what could she possibly offer a man like Julian? She was still in a chair most of the day, still dependent on others for basic tasks, still broken no matter how much progress she'd made. And besides, he'd never given any indication that he felt anything beyond professional interest and friendship. He was kind to her, yes, patient and encouraging. But that was the behavior of a physician, not a suitor. So she buried her feelings and focused on the work. 3 months after they'd begun, Julian announced it was time for the next step. "Literally," he said with a grin, "today you're going to take your first step." Arabella's stomach dropped. "I'm not ready." "You are. You've been standing for 10 minutes at a time now. Your legs are strong enough to support your weight. Now we need to teach them to move." He positioned her between 2 parallel bars he'd had installed, something he'd seen used in hospitals in Vienna. With the bars to hold onto, she could support herself without relying entirely on his assistance. "Feel your weight on your left foot," he instructed. "Now shift it slightly forward. Don't lift your right foot yet, just shift the weight." Arabella did as he asked, feeling the unfamiliar sensation of her body moving through space. Good. Now lift your right foot. Just an inch. Just enough to clear the floor. She tried. God, how she tried. But her foot wouldn't obey. It stayed planted on the ground as if weighted with lead. I can't. You can. Stop thinking about your foot and think about your hip. The movement starts there. Engage your hip flexor. Yes, that muscle I showed you in the drawings. Contract it. Pull your knee up. She focused on the muscle he'd indicated, trying to will it to work. And then, miraculously, her foot lifted. Just an inch. Just barely clearing the ground. But it lifted. Excellent! Julian's voice was bright with excitement. Now, forward. Shift your weight and place it down ahead of where it was. It took every ounce of concentration she possessed. Her foot moved forward perhaps 6 inches before setting down again with a thump. But it had moved. She had taken a step. Arabella burst into tears. I did it! Julian, I did it! He was laughing, his face split in a wide grin. You did! That was a step! A real step! Without thinking, Arabella released the bars and threw her arms around him. Her legs immediately gave out, but he caught her, and suddenly they were pressed close together, her arms around his neck, his around her waist. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Arabella became aware of his heart beating against hers, of the warmth of his body, of the way his arms held her as if she were something precious rather than broken. Arabella, he said quietly, and something in his voice made her look up. His face was inches from hers. His gray eyes had darkened to storm clouds. And there, in his expression, she saw what she'd been afraid to hope for. Desire, tenderness, longing. I shouldn't, he murmured. This violates every principle of professional conduct. You're my patient, and I... She kissed him. It was awkward given her position in his arms, but the moment their lips met, everything else fell away. The pain, the limitations, the fear, all of it dissolved in the warmth of his mouth on hers. He made a low sound in his throat and kissed her back with a hunger that stole her breath. His hand came up to cradle her face, and the tenderness of the gesture made her want to weep. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Julian rested his forehead against hers. This complicates things, he said. Does it? I'm supposed to be helping you as a physician, not this. Can't you be both? She pulled back enough to see his face. Julian, what we're doing here, it's already more intimate than most relationships. You know my body better than I do. You've seen me at my weakest, my most vulnerable. If that's not the foundation for something deeper, I don't know what is. You deserve better than a man who's been ostracized by society for ungentlemanly pursuits. I deserve, she said firmly, a man who sees me as I am and still believes I can be more. A man who doesn't pity me or diminish me. A man who challenges me to be stronger. She cupped his face in her hands. That's you, Julian. You're exactly what I deserve. He closed his eyes, and she saw the war playing out across his features. Professional ethics against personal desire. Propriety against passion. If we do this, he said finally, if we pursue this, I want to do it properly, court you properly, give you the choice to walk away if you decide I'm not what you want. I already know what I want. You're not thinking clearly. You're grateful, and that's clouding. Don't, she interrupted, steel in her voice. Don't diminish what I feel by calling it gratitude. I know the difference between appreciation and love, Julian, and what I feel for you is most definitely the latter. His eyes flew open. Love? Yes, love. I love you. I love your intelligence and your dedication and your complete refusal to accept limitations. I love the way you look at me as if I'm not broken. I love your terrible jokes about anatomy and your passion for medicine and the way you get excited when I make progress. She took a shaky breath. I love you, Julian, And if you don't feel the same, then tell me now so I can start trying to get over it." For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, the most beautiful smile she'd ever seen. "Get over it," he laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Arabella, I've been falling in love with you since the moment you took my hand in that throne room. Every day, watching you fight and struggle and refuse to surrender, it's been torture not to tell you. I've written a dozen letters declaring my feelings and burned them all because I was afraid of taking advantage of your vulnerability. I'm not vulnerable. I'm strong. You taught me that." "Yes," he agreed. "You are the strongest person I've ever known." He kissed her again, soft and sweet. "I love you, Arabella Thornwood. And if you'll have me, I'd like to spend the rest of my life helping you see just how extraordinary you are." Joy burst through her chest like sunrise. "I'll have you. On one condition. Name it. We keep working. I don't want to be your duchess if it means giving up on learning to walk. I need both, you and this, the future and the fight. Then you'll have both." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "We'll work every day. And when you're ready, when you can walk on your own, we'll marry. I want you to walk down the aisle to me, Arabella. I want the world to see you as I see you." It was a dream. An impossible, beautiful dream. But then again, so was everything that had happened in the last 3 months. "Deal," she said. "Now can we try that step again? I think I can do better on the second attempt." He laughed and helped her back to the parallel bars. And as she concentrated on moving her foot forward, on teaching her body to remember what it had forgotten, she felt his presence behind her, steadying, encouraging, loving. She had found what she'd thought was lost forever: hope, purpose, and love. All she had to do now was keep fighting for it. Word of their courtship spread through London like wildfire. The Duke of Ashbourne, the mysterious physician duke who'd shocked society with his unconventional education, was courting the crippled Lady Thornwood. The gossips couldn't decide whether it was romantic or scandalous, whether to celebrate their unusual attachment or condemn it. Arabella's family was in an uproar. Her father arrived at Julian's residence 3 weeks after their first kiss, his face purple with rage. "You dare court my daughter without my permission? You dare raise false hopes in a young woman who what?" Julian's voice was ice. "Who has the misfortune to be your daughter? Lady Thornwood is 26 years old and well past the age of needing your permission for anything. Moreover, she is the most remarkable woman I've ever met, and I consider myself profoundly fortunate that she tolerates my company. She's a cripple." Arabella, who'd been listening from the next room, rolled herself into the study. "I'm sitting right here, Father. Perhaps you could at least have the courtesy to insult me to my face." Lord Thornwood's face went from purple to red. "Arabella, be reasonable. The Duke is playing with you. Men of his stature don't marry damaged goods." "Then I suppose I'm quite fortunate," Julian said with deadly calm, "that I'm not men of his stature. I'm simply a man who recognizes quality when he sees it, something you've evidently failed to do. I won't allow this. I'll have you brought up on charges of what? Courting a woman with her full consent and encouragement? I'm a Duke, Thornwood. You're a baron. If we're to have a legal battle, I suspect I'll emerge the victor." He moved to stand beside Arabella's chair, his hand resting possessively on her shoulder. "And let me be clear, if you continue to harass either myself or Lady Arabella, I will ensure that your standing in society becomes even more precarious than it currently is. Am I understood?" Lord Thornwood sputtered, searching for words and finding none. Finally, he turned to Arabella. "You'll regret this. When he abandons you, when he realizes what a burden you truly are, don't come crawling back to me." "I won't," Arabella said quietly. "You ceased being my father the day you stopped believing in me. Julian is more family to me than you've ever been." After he left, Arabella found she was shaking. Julian knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "I'm sorry," he said. "I shouldn't have engaged with him. I should have simply thrown him out." "No, you did exactly right." She looked at him with fierce pride. "You stood up for me, not because you pitied me, but because you respected me. That means more than you know. He's wrong, you know, about everything." "I know," and she did. Her father's words had hurt, but they couldn't touch the certainty she felt about Julian, about their future together. They increased the intensity of their work after that, as if to prove Lord Thornwood wrong through sheer determination. Arabella stood for longer periods. She took more steps, building from 1 to 2 to 5 to 10. Her legs grew stronger, her balance more sure. There were setbacks, days when the pain was so intense she couldn't get out of bed, days when her legs refused to cooperate no matter how hard she tried, days when she wept in frustration at how slowly progress came. But Julian was always there, patient, encouraging, adjusting their approach when something wasn't working. And slowly, impossibly, she got better. 5 months after that first step, she walked the length of the parallel bars without stopping. 6 months after, she walked across the room using only a cane. 7 months after, she descended a flight of stairs, slowly, carefully, but she did it. Her essays, published under her pseudonym, had gained a following. Literary circles were abuzz trying to identify A. Thornwood, whose sharp wit and insightful analysis had made waves in the publishing world. "You should reveal yourself," Julian said one evening as they shared dinner. "Let the world know who you are." "And destroy the mystery? Never," she grinned at him. "Besides, it's rather delicious being a secret, having power that no one knows about. You're terrible. You love me anyway. God help me, I do." They developed a routine, a life together, even before officially marrying. Arabella spent her days writing and working on her exercises. Julian saw other patients. He'd quietly begun treating those whom conventional physicians had failed, building a reputation as a healer of last resort. Evenings were theirs. They dined together, talked for hours, occasionally scandalized his household by being found kissing in various rooms. It was the happiest Arabella had ever been. And then, 8 months after she'd first stood in the throne room, Julian made an announcement. "It's time," he said. "Time for what?" "Time to show the court what you can do. Time to prove that miracles are simply medicine applied with dedication and love." Arabella's stomach dropped. "Julian, I'm not ready. I can walk, yes, but not well enough to—" "You're ready," he took her hands. "King Edward has requested our presence at a formal court reception. This is our moment, Arabella. This is when you show everyone who doubted you, your father, the physicians, every gossip in London, exactly what you're capable of." "What if I fall?" "Then I'll catch you, just like always." He pulled her close. "But you won't fall. You've walked miles in the last month. You've climbed stairs, danced in our practice sessions, done everything I've asked and more. You are ready, my love. You just need to believe it." She wanted to refuse, wanted to stay in the safety of Julian's home, where no one could watch her struggle or judge her limitations. But that wasn't who she was anymore. She wasn't the girl who hid from life. She was the woman who'd fought her way back from impossibility. "All right," she said, "let's show them what we can do." The night of the reception, Arabella dressed in a gown of midnight blue silk that made her feel like royalty. Her maid arranged her hair in an elaborate style, and Julian presented her with a necklace of sapphires that had belonged to his mother. "For luck," he said, as he fastened it around her neck. "I don't believe in luck." "Neither do I. But I believe in you, and that's far more powerful." They arrived at the palace in Julian's carriage. When the footman opened the door, he reached for the wheeled chair that had been brought along. "No," Arabella said firmly, "I won't need it tonight." Julian's eyes met hers, filled with pride and love. "Are you certain?" "I'm certain." She took his hand and allowed him to help her from the carriage. Her legs trembled as her feet hit the ground, but they held. She was standing. The palace steps loomed before them, perhaps 30 stairs leading up to the grand entrance. It would be the hardest thing she'd done yet. "One step at a time," Julian murmured. "I'm right here." They ascended together, slowly, step by step. Arabella gripped the railing with one hand and Julian's arm with the other. Sweat beaded on her forehead. Her legs burned with effort, but she climbed. At the top, she paused to catch her breath, and Julian kissed her temple. "You're magnificent." The grand ballroom was already full when they were announced. His Grace the Duke of Ashbourne and Lady Arabella Thornwood. Every head turned toward them. The whispers began immediately. "Is she walking? Impossible! I thought she was a cripple." Arabella held her head high and walked into the ballroom on Julian's arm. Not smoothly, not gracefully, but she walked. The crowd parted before them like the Red Sea. She could see the shock on faces, the disbelief. She saw her father, his expression frozen between fury and amazement. She saw her physicians, who declared her hopeless, their mouths hanging open in astonishment. And she saw King Edward rising from his throne with a look of genuine delight. "Lady Thornwood," he called out, "come forward. We would speak with you." It was a command performance, the moment she'd been preparing for. Arabella released Julian's arm. "Arabella," he started. "I need to do this part alone," she whispered. "Please." Understanding flashed in his eyes. He stepped back, giving her space. And Arabella walked forward alone. It was perhaps 50 feet from where she stood to the base of the throne. 50 feet that felt like 50 miles. Her legs shook. Her balance wavered. Every eye in the room tracked her progress. But she walked. 1 step, 2, 5, 10, 20. The ballroom was utterly silent, except for the soft rustle of her skirts and the click of her shoes on marble. 30 steps, 40. She could see the king's face now, see the wonder in his young eyes. 45 steps. Almost there. Her legs were screaming. She didn't know if she could make it the last few feet. 50 steps. She reached the throne and sank into a curtsy, a wobbly, imperfect curtsy, but a curtsy nonetheless, before her legs finally gave out. Julian was there instantly, catching her, supporting her as the ballroom erupted in applause. "Lady Thornwood," the king said, his voice carrying across the sudden noise, "you have accomplished something we believed to be impossible. You have shown this court the power of determination, of refusing to accept defeat. It is our honor to witness such strength." "Thank you, Your Majesty," Arabella managed, "though I cannot claim the credit. Without the Duke of Ashbourne, I would still be in my chair." "Then we must thank you both," Edward smiled. "It seems miracles are still possible in this modern age." As Julian helped her to a chair, a regular chair, not her wheeled one, the court pressed forward, everyone wanting to congratulate her, to express their amazement, to be part of the moment. Lady Margaret found her, tears streaming down her face. "You did it! You actually did it! I did. Arabella gripped her hand. And if Julian can help me, perhaps he can help you too. Would you like me to introduce you? I would like that very much. Later, as the reception wore on and Arabella rested her exhausted legs, Julian brought her champagne and sat beside her. You were extraordinary, he said softly. We were extraordinary. She leaned against his shoulder. I couldn't have done any of this without you. That's not true. The strength was always yours. I simply helped you find it again. Then help me find a little more, she said, because I'm going to need it. For what? She smiled mysteriously. I've been thinking about your proposal, about walking down the aisle to you. His breath caught. And I think I'm ready. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. I want to marry you, Julian. I want to start the rest of our life together. Joy transformed his face. Are you certain? We can wait as long as you need. There's no rush. I'm certain. I've spent 5 years being afraid to want things, afraid to hope. I'm done with fear. She turned to face him fully. I love you. You've given me back my life. The least I can do is share that life with you. He kissed her then, not caring who was watching, not caring about propriety or scandal. When they broke apart, he was grinning like a fool. Then let's do it properly. Let's have a grand wedding where everyone can see you walk down the aisle. Let's show the world that love and determination can overcome anything. Deal, she said. Though I'm keeping my nom de plume. I rather enjoy being a mysterious critic. I wouldn't have it any other way. They sat together in the glittering ballroom, surrounded by the nobility who'd once pitied her. And Arabella felt complete. She still couldn't walk perfectly, probably never would. There would be days when she needed her chair, days when the pain was too much, but she could walk. And more importantly, she'd learned that her limitations didn't define her, that strength came not from perfection, but from refusing to surrender, that love could bloom in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the greatest miracles were simply the result of two people refusing to give up on each other. The wedding took place 3 months later in Westminster Abbey. It was the event of the season. Everyone who was anyone in London society attended, curious to see if Lady Thornwood would truly walk down the aisle, or if the whole thing had been an elaborate hoax. Arabella stood at the back of the cathedral, her hand resting lightly on her father's arm. He'd apologized, stiffly, awkwardly, when he'd learned of the engagement. She'd accepted because Julian had asked her to, because holding on to anger would only poison her happiness. But she felt no connection to the man beside her. He was merely a prop, a social convention to be observed. Her real family was waiting at the altar. Ready? Her father asked. More than ready. The organ began to play. The massive doors swung open. And Arabella began to walk. The aisle stretched before her like an eternity. She could see Julian at the end, resplendent in formal dress, his eyes fixed on her with such love it made her heart ache. She walked slowly, not because she couldn't walk faster, but because she wanted to savor every step, wanted to feel the ground beneath her feet, the strength in her legs, the miracle of movement she'd thought lost forever. The Abbey was packed. 3,000 people watched her progress. She saw familiar faces, Lady Margaret, who'd become her closest friend, the physicians who'd declared her hopeless, the gossips who'd whispered about her. She saw King Edward, sitting in the front row, beaming with pride. But mostly, she saw Julian. He was crying, actually crying, tears streaming down his face as he watched her walk toward him. It took her 5 minutes to reach the altar, 5 minutes during which the entire Abbey held its breath. When she finally stood before him, he took her hands in his and whispered, "I'm so proud of you." "I'm proud of us," she corrected. The ceremony was beautiful. Traditional vows mixed with personal promises. Julian pledged to support her, to challenge her, to never let her settle for less than she was capable of. Arabella pledged to fight, to grow, to share every victory and every struggle. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Julian kissed her with such passion that the abbey erupted in scandalized laughter. "I love you," he said against her lips. "I love you too." "Now let's get to the reception. All this standing is hell on my legs." He laughed and swept her into his arms, carrying her down the aisle while the crowd cheered. It was unconventional, perhaps even improper, but it was perfectly them. 5 years later, Arabella stood in the nursery of Ashbourne House, watching Julian play with their daughter. Little Charlotte had inherited her father's gray eyes and her mother's determination. And she'd been born strong and healthy, despite what the physicians had warned about Arabella's ability to carry a child. "Never underestimate your mother," Julian had told the worried doctors. "She's made a career of proving the impossible possible." Now, as Charlotte took her first wobbly steps toward Arabella, both parents watched with tears in their eyes. "She's walking," Julian whispered. "She is." Arabella knelt, still a bit awkward, but she could do it, and caught her daughter as she toddled forward. "Well done, darling." Charlotte beamed, proud of herself. "Remember when you thought you'd never walk again?" Julian asked, wrapping his arms around both of them. "I remember thinking I'd never do a lot of things. Walk, dance, write under my own name, have a family." She leaned back against him. "You proved me wrong about all of it. We proved it wrong, together." Arabella's essays, published now under her real name, had become required reading in literary circles. She'd written a memoir about her recovery that had inspired countless others with disabilities. Julian had opened a clinic that treated patients conventional medicine had given up on. They'd built something beautiful from what should have been a tragedy. "Any regrets?" Julian asked. She thought about the question seriously, about the fall that had changed everything, about the years of pain and limitation, about the struggle to walk again. "No," she said finally, "not a single one, because all of it led me to you. All of it made me who I am."
And I rather like who I am. I rather like who you are, too. He kissed the top of her head. "Though I'm still amazed you agreed to marry an ostracized duke with ungentlemanly pursuits. Best decision I ever made." She turned in his arms, facing him. "You taught me something important, Julian. You taught me that limitations are only permanent if we accept them. That strength comes from fighting, not from being perfect. That love isn't about finding someone who completes you. It's about finding someone who believes you're already complete and just helps you see it. That's beautiful. You should write that down." "I already did. It's in next month's essay." He laughed, rich and warm. "Of course it is." Charlotte tugged on Arabella's skirt, demanding attention. They both knelt down to play with her. And as they built towers of blocks together, Arabella felt profound gratitude. She'd stood before the entire court. She'd walked down the aisle to the man she loved. She'd built a life that honored both her limitations and her strength. And it had all started with a simple choice: to take an offered hand, to trust when she had no reason to trust, to believe in the impossible. "Thank you," she said to Julian. "For what?" "For seeing me, for believing in me, for loving me enough to push me beyond what I thought was possible." He cupped her face in his hands. "Thank you for letting me, for being brave enough to hope, for showing me that medicine isn't just about healing bodies, it's about healing hearts too." They kissed, gentle and sweet, while Charlotte giggled and knocked over her block tower. And in that moment, surrounded by love and laughter and the family they'd built, Arabella knew with absolute certainty She had walked, she had fought, she had won. And the greatest victory of all was that she'd never had to do any of it alone.